Verse 18 says, "For Christ also suffered." That is to say that Christ's suffering was ultimate. You and I may suffer, but we do not die. We do not suffer to the point of dying. That word suffering, suffered, means simply died, ultimate suffering. You cannot suffer any more than that. Christ died. Hebrews 12:4 tells us, "In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood." So we talk about pain, suffering, nobody knows. We talk about our suffering, but we have not suffered to the point of dying or shedding our blood. We are told that we have suffered, but we haven't had to give our life. The ultimate is to be murdered for righteousness. None of us in this room has gone that far. So Christ's suffering did not need to be repeated. That's a very important aspect. Continuing in verse 18, "For Christ also suffered once." Once meaning perpetual validity that does not require repetition. It does not need repetition. Any religion, including the Roman Catholic Church, that requires Christ's sacrifice every time is an absolute atrocious thing, because there needs to be no repetition, is an attack on the singular uniqueness of what he accomplished on the cross. It was unlike any other sacrifice, never needed to be repeated. Do you think it was something new for the Jews that they who had sacrificed lambs and animals all those years, and at any given Passover, they had to kill 250,000 lambs and had to repeat it over and over every year at Passover? Sacrifice after sacrifice, but all of a sudden Christ dies once. Hebrews 7:27 says, "He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself." There is no further work of Christ. He did it once for all. Old Testament sacrifices were limited to a certain person, a certain family, a certain nation, a certain time. Not so the sacrifice of Christ. It brought satisfaction to God for all who would come to him. Christ's suffering was related to sins, not his own, verse 18. "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous." Christ lived entire life, never had an evil thought, said an evil word, did anything evil. He was sinless. And the Old Testament laid out what God said: because of your sins, you must make an offering, requiring the death of an animal as a symbol of the need for someone to die to cover sins. But Christ's suffering brought us to God. Very important concept in verse 18. "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God." You see, the Holy of Holies became immediately accessible to all of us when Christ died. There was no more separation, no more priesthood, because we are all priests of God. All now have access. The verb "to bring us" is introducing someone. It's providing access for somebody. It is bringing someone into a relationship. So in a king's court, and if you wanted to see the king, you would have to go through this introducer. You had to convince him that you really were in need to seeing the king. And if you wanted to see the king, of course, you had to convince this person. Acts 4:12 says, "There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved." For those who put their faith in Jesus, they are ushered into the presence of God. It assumes that at some point in the death on the cross, Jesus had died spiritually, and this is the controversy. How could Jesus die spiritually? Spiritual death is defined as separation from God. And as you recall, Jesus actually said to God, my God, why have you forsaken me or abandoned me? Why have you left me?" There was a separation from God, but not a cessation of existence. He did not cease to exist because he was eternal. Even humans in death do not cease to exist. The soul continues to live. The mystery here is a little bit unclear, but somehow Jesus was, in a moment of time, as all sin was poured out on him, God had turned his back on him. But whatever spiritual separation he experienced was quickly gone, because he said a moment later, he says, now into your hands. In fact, he says, Father, now into your hands I commit my spirit. At that point, he was made sin. The Bible tells us that Christ was made sin that he did not even know. Then his spirit was made alive, and then he committed it to God. When Jesus' body died, it went to the tomb. You can understand that. But his spirit was alive. The question now is, where did he go? This living spirit, where did it go? Verse 19, in which he went, it says. The eternal Christ went someplace. The verb here refers to a personal going, literally means to go somewhere else. His spirit had been with his body on the cross, but after his death, his spirit went somewhere else. Where did he go? We are told in verse 19, in which he went and proclaimed. Proclaimed. He went and proclaimed. In other words, he gave a sermon. He preached. He went somewhere and gave a triumphant sermon. Even before his resurrection on Sunday morning, he was moving freely in the spiritual realm. The verb here is to preach or to make a proclamation. It is not to preach the gospel. He did not go to preach so that people would become saved. He went to preach to give a triumphant speech, if you will. He did not go somewhere to preach salvation. He went to announce a triumph. Word here, herald, is a military, as a military generals and kings would have a herald announce their victories. That's exactly what this word means. Jesus went somewhere to announce his victory, to proclaim his victory over death, over demons, over hell, over Satan, over sin. Question, to whom did he make this announcement? Verse 19 tells us, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits. Who are these spirits? The New Testament always uses the term spirits to refer to angels, never to people. It is not referring to people, it is referring to angels, except Hebrews 12, where it is referred to as the spirit of just men. Every other use of spirits refers to angels. The spirits refer to demons here. So Jesus went to declare his victory over demons. Verse 19, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. Where is this prison? This could not be a message of salvation to demons, because demons cannot be saved. The demons that fell are forever damned, locked into their destiny. That's what we are told in Hebrews 2:16. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. He does not redeem spirits, he redeems people. So he went somewhere to proclaim, to preach to spirits or to demons. But why would he go and herald a triumph to a bunch of demons? You remember, since the beginning of time, when Satan fell, he has been at war with the purposes of God, and he and the demonic forces have been against what God wanted to do from the beginning. There is a cosmic conflict in this universe between God and Satan. Satan and demons have done everything they possibly could to destroy God's purpose. And throughout Old Testament, Satan tried to destroy the messianic line, the people of God. Always tried it, nothing has changed. Satan is still trying to destroy the people of God, the nation of Israel. He tried to destroy him, to violate the plan of God in the New Testament, to get Christ in a temptation to overthrow the purposes of God by having the mob kill him over and over. He tried when he was dead to keep him in the tomb so that he would never get out. Unsuccessful, of course. The demons of hell and Satan have always sought to destroy the work of Christ. And now, as he is on the cross and bearing all sin, his life crushed out of him, it would seem that the demons have won. They were in the midst of its carnival celebrating this great defeat when Jesus arrives. Where was this place? It says in prison. Nowhere in the Bible are the souls or spirits of people ever said to be imprisoned. So people are not imprisoned. These are spirits that are imprisoned. This prison is not a condition, it is an actual location. If the demons are imprisoned, how could they be running around all over right now? Have you ever experienced any kind of demonic force in your life? If all the demons are in this prison, how could there be so much demonic forces here wherever we are, wherever we go? Because there are different demons. Not all demons are in the prison. Let me put it this way. Angels splits into two kinds. Listen carefully. Angels splits into two kinds, holy type and fallen type. And of the fallen type, there are two kinds of them, loose and bound. And of the bound, there are two kinds of them, temporarily bound and permanently bound. Here, we are talking about the angels fallen bound permanently. So those who are in prison are locked up, they cannot go anywhere. The loose ones, lots of them are running around today, wherever we are, wherever believers are, still trying to dethrone Christ and to thwart the plans of God. We are told in the book of Ephesians that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against what? Demons, spiritual forces. Remember when Jesus was casting demons out of a man, and they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss or to the pit. They knew that their time was not yet, and they were afraid. They did not want to go to that permanent place. They were saying, do not make us prisoners. And you recall Matthew 8:29? And behold, they cried out, what have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? In other words, we are here because we are not yet, we cannot go to where we would be eventually be permanently. The time is not yet. Why are you here bothering us to torment us? This was a prison of disobedient spirits. How did they get bound like that? Verse 20 tells us, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water. There is a prison filled with bound demons, been there since the time of Noah. Time of Noah. They were sent there because they overstepped the bounds God has established. It always is the case. When you disobey God's command, Adam and Eve, who violated God's command, were kicked out of the paradise. Likewise, these angels, these were kicked out, or they were cast into that permanent prison because they overstepped the bounds God has established. As you know, the demons were filling up the earth with all their wicked anti-God activity by this time. That is why God destroyed the earth by flood. No other time in which the unbelief and disobedience was as pronounced as in those days. There was nothing greater than that kind of wickedness. And I have to add this commentary, until today. As I have just said, no other time has there been which the unbelief and disobedience was as pronounced as in those days. And today it is so evil, wicked, that Jesus must return to reclaim his creation. There's just no way. Right is wrong, wrong is right. There is no absolute, there is no truth. Is whatever you believe, whatever you think, that becomes truth, and majority rules. The ones who are the loudest get to rule, and that is so anti-Bible, anti-God. For 120 years, the main purpose was not to make a boat. That was an object lesson about the impending judgment of God. The boat was only for 1 year. A sermon for 120 years. Unfortunately, nobody listened, unlike you at Sola. At least that's my hope. Only 8 people survived. Not all the demons were put in prison. Some are still loose today. 2 Peter 2, 4 and 5. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. The word hell in there, verse 4, is the English transliteration Tartarus. Tartarus, a name in classical Greek mythology to describe the abyss where rebellious gods were punished and were sent. And so this word was taken over into Judaism and used to refer to the presence of fallen angels. And that's where we get that. And the book of Jude also mentions this. They were sent there, Jude 6. There's only one chapter, so Jude 6 and 7. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Verse 7, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, served as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. What was their specific sin that God was so angry and they were put in this prison? They did not stay within their own position. In other words, they did not stay in their lane. They violated what they were told to do. They abandoned their proper place. What sin? Sodomy and homosexuality. Do you remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot was living there and angels came to visit Lot? 2 magnificent creatures in human form. The men of Sodom and Gomorrah went crazy, tried to rape these angels. They were after their flesh, which was outside their domain. The door was shut, and God struck them all blind. And guess what? Instead of being afraid, they kept beating on the door. Their lust was so great. What did these angels do? Genesis 6 tells us, starting with verse 1. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. What is this talking about? It says sons of God. Sounds like perhaps angels, perhaps sounds like some holy people. Sons of God are demons, term used in the Old Testament to refer to angels. Demons started as being angels. If these are referring to people, it would have said sons of man or sons of men, as we see there in verse 4, daughters of man. These are fallen angels who came down, took on human bodies, cohabitated with women, and produced a generation of some kind of a demonic hybrid. And it is possible that they are called the Nephilim. It can also mean fallen ones or violent ones. Used only one other time in the Old Testament, in Numbers chapter 13, they are the giant type people. Just the other day, I was at the Source Mall, and I saw these 2 women that were so tall. I thought, wow. They were wearing like 2-foot high heels. That's how they were. I was so scared of them. Wow, they're so tall. But these were giants. Apparently, they were the production of some kind of monsters, powerful giants, very violent. They wanted to pollute the human stream to make it unredeemable. That has been the plan of Satan all along, to destroy humanity, somehow destroy to such a degree that God himself would say no more. And he actually did just that, only preserving 8 people. And I always wonder when the Bible says, I will no longer destroy the world by water. I used to say, yes, I don't like water anyway. Please, thank you, God. But next time will be by fire. That's even worse, I don't know. And so God has a way of judging the world, people who overstep and those who are against his will. These demonic forces disguise themselves and hide behind people, and they come disrupting and creating a havoc just so that the church that proclaims Christ as Lord will not continue existing. But we are told here, just as Christ who suffered, that word again means dying, just as Christ died and proved himself to be triumphant, and he went to that place of torment, that prison where the demons are, and just said, hey, I am alive. I have defeated death and hell and Satan himself. I have defeated everything. They who were partying, saying, Christ has just been crucified. He's died. We have won the victory, when Jesus all of a sudden appears. What magnificent, triumphant scenario that is. We don't need to wait for Easter next month. We don't need to wait for the Passion Week to talk about Christ's death. Every day ought to be a recognition of his death and resurrection. And we ought to be waiting for his blessed return every single day.
Coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it. When it's all about you, it's all about